When this showed up in my mail a couple of weeks ago, I thought an inexpensive closed back headphone, ugh. But you know what? It's actually pretty decent. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and today we're taking a look at the new Simgot EP5, which is, yes, an inexpensive closed back headphone. And by inexpensive, I mean it's under $100 at, I believe, 86 US bucks is the asking price, although there's a couple of configurations. You can add a microphone cable to it for $6, or you can add a USB DAC to it. I think it's kind of targeted at gamers. But yeah, it's a new closed back headphone. And I don't think this thing's gonna blow anyone away, but if you're looking for a closed back headphone and you don't have a lot of money, look, there's not a lot of great closed backs out there. This thing, it's not bad. So let's talk about it. And I guess before we do that, a quick shout out to Linsole for sending this headphone in for review. If you want to check out the EP5, I'll have it linked in the description down below, as well as anything else that we talk about today. But let's stay here at the table and just talk about the build quality, fit, form factor, all that stuff. And then we'll get into talking about the sound. I got some frequency response graphs that we can take a look at. And then also bring in some other headphones for some comparisons. Some of them are direct competitors, and one of them is not. I'll leave that a secret. But as far as like what you get inside the box, it's basically what you see. You get a headphone and you get a cable. This over here is not included in the stock packaging. Here, I'll just show you. Here is the stock packaging. But Linsole sells it with it. Like you can add this on for an extra $6 at checkout. It is, where should we start? Because this doesn't come in the box. I almost don't want to start here, but we're going to start here anyway. Again, this doesn't come in the box, but this is the alternate cable that you can get with it, and it's got a microphone in it, which is basically the big difference here, right? It's still a dual entry cable, right? So you've got still a left and a right, but you've got this little boom mic that has, you know, a little flexible wire on it, so you can position it however you'd like. And this cable is generally actually kind of a nice cable. It's a little on the thin side. It's cloth covered. I don't know if that'll come across on camera. Yeah, you can kind of see that. And I would say my biggest issue with this cable is just that it's a little bit on the long side. This cable is longer than the stock cable by, I would say, probably 1.5 feet maybe. So it's maybe like a 5, maybe a 6 foot cable. Yeah, it's probably about a 5 foot cable. Other than that, I don't know, it's a microphone cable. Look, the sound quality on this thing, and again, this doesn't come in the box. I'm doing a little mini review of this thing that you can add on extra. I did do a little bit of testing of this microphone versus some other microphones, and the sound on this thing actually pretty decent. It's not like there's no electronic noise filtering or noise cancellation or anything like that. Just a straight microphone. So expect it to sound kind of like a microphone on a pair of Apple AirPods, which is frankly surprisingly decent. But I will note that when I first plugged this in, the first time I did a microphone test, I had some weird electronic interference, and then I unplugged it, plugged it back in, it went away, and I never got it to come back again. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but something to look out for, I guess, if you're using this to talk to teammates on Discord or whatever, ask them and then just unplug it, plug it back in. But that'll bring us to talking about the rest of the headphone and what actually does come inside the box. And well, let's start with this cable, which I actually quite like. This cable looks pretty straightforward. You know, it's a relatively short, also a cloth covered cable that is 2 cores and wound. And this reminds me a lot of the cable that comes with a lot of Mondrop's headphones. And I like that cable so much, I put it on a bunch of headphones that are much more expensive. In fact, they've got, like, Mondrop has a more expensive cable that they put on their more expensive headphones. I like this cable so much, I put it on the more expensive headphones. Do you follow? Did that make sense? I hope so. But anyway, it is a normal kind of, dual entry, 3.5 millimeter dual entry, right? So it is a swappable, removable cable, which is kind of cool. There are not a lot of headphones in this price range that have swappable cables, so that's nice. And it's a mechanism that you're going to find on a lot of headphones or a lot of cables, so it's very easy to find replacements should you need to. I guess we'll leave this unplugged for now, but just remember, this is not a Bluetooth headphone. This is a wired only headphone. So I'm going to Rode wrap this cable, put it down here, and let's focus on talking about the headphone itself. Now, the build quality on this, as you might expect for an inexpensive headphone, is not super premium, but it's actually kind of nice in some ways. So you can see that there's a lot of metal, right? You've got like this big steel band that makes up kind of the bulk of the structure of the headphone. And it goes into these yokes where you've got also more metal. I like this, the steel. I think it's a good look. but also just generally like it feels kind of nice in the hand. It's lightweight, super lightweight, and it feels almost like kind of like a Porta-Pro, but just like more substantial than a Porta-Pro, if you're familiar with that, which I know is not like the pinnacle of build quality, but it's also an inexpensive headphone. And this has just got kind of like a similar like weightlessness to it, but it feels a lot more solid, which I like. Apart from the metal bands, you do have these plastic ear cups and some, I don't know, kind of goofy branding on it. Salute to the art and science. They print here on both the left and the right cups, as well as on the headband. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that in particular, but it's small enough that you can kind of ignore it. There's no obnoxious, like, giant Simgot logo. In fact, they're pretty small with it. A little itty bitty Simgot logo. So I think that is generally pretty well done. As far as, I don't know, I guess that's pretty much the aesthetics. The rest of the build quality, you can see that you do have a soft suspension strap up here that does actually a pretty good job of distributing weight. I don't have any issues with it. Again, it is also a very lightweight headphone, so there's not a lot of weight to distribute anyway. But then you've got these ear pads, which are, they look kind of large from the outside. In fact, like if you were trying to pad swap this, you would probably need to start with a fairly large pad, and it should be pretty easy to pad swap. Like they'll just peel off like a lot of normal pads. But once you get inside, the ear cup is a little bit on the small side, a little bit on the cramped side, just because they cut into kind of like the left and the right sides here to give it more of this oval shape. And I assume that they've done that for tuning reasons, and we'll talk about the tuning. The tuning I think is actually pretty well done on this, but it does make it maybe a little bit cramped and a little bit sweaty, as you would kind of expect of a small closed back headphone with kind of a leatherette cup or a leatherette pad. Generally the material feels quite nice. You can see that it's actually pretty soft. I guess I'll throw it on my head so you can take a look at it here. And as I do that, I'm going to comment on a couple of things. All right, so one, it is a closed back headphone. So as I have this on my head and I'm talking to you, my voice is occluded. Again, they pitch this as kind of, or at least given the accessories that they're selling it with, I think they're kind of positioning this as kind of a gamer targeted headphone where you can talk while wearing it, talk to your teammates. But I'm actually personally not a big fan of talking while wearing closed back headphones. I think this occluded effect is just not very comfortable. If you're fine with it, obviously, you know, make up your own mind about it. But if you're trying to buy a gamer headphone or a headphone specifically for gaming use, I don't know that I would recommend a closed back headphone for that purpose. Even though this one does, you know, check some other boxes. The one other thing I will complain about this, it's not gamer related, as I'm wearing it, is there's no tilt. There's like there's no swivel on the ear pads, right? If I go back to the table, you can see that this is very rigid. Like this tilting, I'm basically fighting the spring tension of this steel headband. It basically just don't expect it to swivel left and right at all in your head. I don't really find that it makes it so it's difficult to get a seal. I don't know, the pads are fairly compliant, and I guess my head is straight enough that it works out. But it would be nice to see, because otherwise you've got, you know, a nice range of tilt here on these. In fact, let me set. All right, it doesn't quite bottom out, so I do actually still have some additional space for the tilt, so that much is good. They just didn't give it any of the swivel. The other thing I guess I'll talk about as we're talking about fit stuff is the adjustment mechanism, which I'll punch it on here. It is just a friction fit, right? So you have infinite adjustability. You can fit it to exactly whatever size you want, but because there's no clicks, if you're like really particular about getting it exactly even, if you're like one of those weirdos like me, you might have to struggle with that a little bit, and because it might work itself out of position, and then you're gonna have to do it again. Small complaint. But generally, yeah, in terms of build quality, like I think this is actually pretty nice, you know? Again, it's lightweight, it doesn't feel expensive because it's not expensive, and with the materials that they have, given how much metal there is on this thing, I kind of like the way it feels, and even the way it looks. Anything else to talk about? Form factor, I don't think so. We've already talked about all this stuff, so we can now talk about the sound signature here on the Simgot. And this is where I'm actually kind of impressed. Again, like I mentioned, closed back headphones, I usually just don't really care for. I don't listen to closed backs in my daily life, apart from the Dan Clark Audio E3. If you're considering that as an alternative to this, I probably wouldn't. Don't look at the price. But anyway, Let's take a look at the frequency response graph here of the EP5. And in a lot of their marketing material, they are targeting the Harman target. In fact, they show how their frequency response aligns with the Harman target. On my rig, it didn't exactly, but I'm not going to hold that against them because I don't have a lot of experience using the Harman target here on my rig. I don't know how accurately it should match. So I'm going to stick with this other target because I think this does a little bit better job of explaining for me what I hear. And basically what you hear is that you see that it does have quite a bit of bass, but let's ignore that for now. We'll talk about the bass in a little bit. The mid-range and stuff is generally like pretty well tuned. There's maybe a little bit of, you see this dip here in the lower treble region. I think that that does have the effect of making the vocal sound a little bit on the soft side, a little bit pulled back. Well, it's not even so much pulled back, just they kind of lack like a texture to them. But generally the sound signature on this actually ends up sounding, I think, a little bit thinner and brighter than what you expect just based on this graph. It does have a fair bit of bass emphasis to it, but it nonetheless doesn't really end up sounding very bassy. And I think it's because just the bass quality is not really there. It's not like a tight, punchy bass. It's actually a little bit on the thin sounding side. And I don't know, yeah, the definition on the bass really is just not that great, right? It doesn't have that sense of weight and that slam and that physicality behind it, which again, I don't know, maybe these are complaints you shouldn't lob at an $86 headphone. But yeah, if you're looking at it on the graph, like it looks like it could have that. And I'm just telling you right now, to my ear, it doesn't. The bass is a little bit on the sloppy side. Now, I said that I like this nonetheless, so let's talk about why. I mean, I think that the sound is just generally, it's pleasant. Like the tuning is pleasant, which is frankly kind of a rarity for inexpensive headphones generally, and especially inexpensive headphones that are closed back as well. I mean, if I'm going back to complaints, I mean, I would say that the treble does sound a little bit on the swishy side, kind of like, I don't know, you like wear like a nylon jacket and you walk and it kind of has that there's a little bit of that effect going on here. Not that it's like literally introducing swishy sounds where they don't exist. Just when you hear treble, like hi-hats and stuff like that, they'll come across a little bit swishy and a little bit less defined. Again, kind of similar to the bass, right? It doesn't have that tight incisiveness to anything. But again, it's an $86 headphone. I would say that the imaging on this thing is about what you would expect. It's decent. Not fantastic, but again, it's a closed back. It's not going to give you like a really strong sense of separation between the sounds. And yeah, just overall, I think it's like a nicely presented mid-range that's not overly contrasty. And it does have too much bass, but it ends up not really sounding that bass dominant because the bass just doesn't really have that much definition. It does end up sounding more of a vocal forward, somewhat bright and trebly set. Yeah, so let me bring in some other headphones for comparison. And I think some of these comparisons are going to make sense, and one is not going to make sense, but it will make sense when I make it make sense. So let's pay attention to that. But for now, this is the Mondrop Joker. So this is a good example of what I'm talking about, an inexpensive closed-back headphone not sounding very good. This thing sounds, I forgot how bad this thing sounds actually. It's so thin, so bright, so shrill. And it's wild. This with EQ does actually end up sounding kind of good. I didn't play around with EQ on the Simgot. It doesn't really need it, but I'm sure you can make it better. You can make pretty much any headphone better with EQ. But this with EQ, I actually got to a point where I enjoyed it. Like not just tolerated it, but I enjoyed it. But without EQ, this thing is really just kind of not pleasant. I'd say the build quality in this thing is also quite clunky and like rattly. It does have tilt though, which is nice. So it does have that advantage, but let me throw this on my head just so you can see how kind of silly this headphone is. The other thing that's interesting about this, and I'm reminded as I put it on my head, is that the Joker just isn't as closed back as something like this. So as I was talking, I would actually be comfortable talking here on the Joker, where talking on this thing, again, I don't like that occlusion effect. I don't like my ears being plugged and not being able to hear myself. I can hear myself okay through these headphones. So if you're looking for a gamer headphone, this one might actually end up being better for that reason, which is weird. I didn't think I'd say that until I just did. Okay, but yeah, sound-wise, this thing is just, it's goofy. There's no bass on this thing, whereas this at least has some amount of bass. But yeah, that's pretty much that headphone. Now, the other headphone I wanted to bring in that I think makes sense, apart from the fact that it's old. I don't know if anyone even remembers this headphone, but it's kind of like the go-to budget closed-back headphone from many moons ago. This is a Creative Aurvana Live, and in some ways this isn't super comparable because it doesn't have a removable cable, right? The cable is fixed here on the Aurvana Live. And I would say that the ear pad size is even smaller. Like I've actually got an aftermarket ear pad on this, which I will say does change the sound. But I also have the stock pad as well. But the stock pad is a little bit smaller. So it doesn't fit quite as, it is over ear technically, yes, but it almost fits like an on ear, whereas a Simgot you can see is just quite a bit bigger of an ear pad. So it fits a little bit different. But in terms of sound quality, I actually still got to give it to the Creative. Like this thing holds up. This thing actually sounds pretty good. It's definitely more of a V-shaped sound signature, a little bit more contrasty, but because of that, the bass gets more impact, it gets more physicality, and it's more exciting and engaging that way. I think the treble is also similarly just a little bit sharper, maybe a little bit too sharp for some people, especially with this alternate pad. And if you're curious, I believe this is a Brainwaves. It's like a pad that's made for the 7506, I think is what it is. But where was I going with this? Is just generally it's, you know, a nice contrasty fun sound signature that I think is more fun. I enjoy this more than I do the Simgot, but I think the Simgot is probably the more balanced sound signature, if that makes sense, right? It's just that like neither of these are great sounding headphones, just that the Creative gives you more of that physicality and kind of that ASMR quality to audio. That is frankly why I'm in the hobby. Anything else to talk about the physical form factor? Oh, look at that, we got rotation. But man, this thing feels even cheaper. And I think it is actually quite a bit cheaper. It didn't used to be cheap, but I looked it up on Amazon recently. It was like 40 bucks, which is actually kind of nuts. But that will lead us into talking about our third and final headphone. And I promised a surprise. Well, I don't know if it's gonna be that big of a surprise, but it's the Koss KPH30i. And I'm bringing this up because, well, it's inexpensive and it has a microphone, is really why I'm bringing this thing up. This is an open back on-ear headphone that is like 30 bucks, okay? It's not really comparable to the Simgot in a lot of ways, except the fact that it has a microphone on it. And if you're looking for something for using for gaming, personally, this is kind of my budget choice. And by budget choice, I mean, if I'm playing Apex Legends, and I haven't done this in a couple of years, I'll warn, but if I'm playing Apex Legends, I need to talk to people, this is the headphone I use. The microphone is worse on this versus the microphone that you can get with this thing. I did test that specifically. It sounds muddier. The microphone on this is actually surprisingly not very good, but it does the job. But the sound quality is just much more pleasant. It's more of a mid-range, kind of a warmer mid-range tune on the KPH30i, and I guess because it's open back, it just gives me more of a sense of space. I think the bass physicality is actually surprisingly tighter and punchier here on the KPH than it is on the Simgot. And yeah, just generally, I find this to be a much more pleasant experience. Also, if I'm talking, my hearing is not occluded because it's an an open back. The one downside of the KPH30i, maybe a couple downsides, it's all made of plastic. It definitely feels cheaper than the Simgot, but the biggest downside is just that it fits on ear. And I guess I'll throw this thing on my head as I'm talking about that. And after probably like 30 minutes, 60 minutes max, this thing will start to feel, frankly, a little bit painful sitting on the ear. The ear pads are just quite thin, and you do have this clamp kind of pressing down on it. It gets like literally, this is one of the more uncomfortable headphones I have, but I do find that I can just kind of like lift it up, move it slightly on my ear, and that usually is enough to give me an extra like 30 minutes or so of enjoyment. And frankly, for me, the sound quality on this is better enough that I would personally struggle through that. I personally prefer this headphone to the Simgot for the purpose of gaming. But again, it's not a closed back. And if you need a closed back, well, the Simgot EP5 is definitely not a bad option. Yeah, 86 bucks, sounds pretty decent, built really, actually surprisingly nice. Just could use a little bit of tilt. But other than that, I don't know, if you want to check it out, I've got it linked in the description down below. I'm going to give this thing 3 stars out of 5. Again, shout out to Linsole for sending this thing in for review. Link down below while you're down there. If you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
This review is super, yeah. Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the